A young man who came to America from Ireland on a green card, got drafted into the United States Army, went to Vietnam, came home to be called a baby killer, took his uniform off in the airport, and never talked about any of it for years. And that story, honestly, is one of the most American stories you're going to hear about Vietnam, not because it's unusual, because it wasn't. Because that was the experience of thousands and thousands of men who served in that war, came home to a country that didn't know how to receive them, and just quietly went to work and raised their families and tried to keep moving. That's what we're going to talk about today. The haunting experiences of men who went to Vietnam, what they carried over there, and what they brought back with them whether they wanted to or not. Now, before we get into the full story here, if you're finding this channel for the first time, we do this regularly. We sit down with veterans and we let them talk, and then we try to do justice to what they said. These are real voices, real memories, real men. If that matters to you and you want to keep hearing these stories, go ahead and hit subscribe. It doesn't cost anything, and it means we can keep doing this work of making sure these voices aren't forgotten. So let's start at the beginning, because the beginning matters here. This veteran came over from Ireland. He came to America as a young man on a green card, the way a lot of people came over, working towards something, trying to build a life in a country that represented something better. He settled in the Chicago area, got a job making gaskets at Victor Gasket, lived in Oak Park, and then in September of 1965, he was drafted into the United States Army. Now here's the thing that's worth pausing on for a second. He was in America on a green card. He wasn't a citizen. But in that era, if you were on a green card and you got drafted, you served. And military service was, in fact, a path toward citizenship. He knew that. He accepted it. He went. And he'll tell you today, simply, that it was the proper thing to do. You did your documentation right, you came here the right way, and when the country called you, you went. That's how he understood it. Basic training was 10 weeks, and this man was not soft going in. He was about 145 pounds, lean and mean, and during basic he won a mile race in just over 6 minutes, running in combat boots with a backpack full of rocks on a track. 145 pounds, and he's outrunning men who thought they were in shape. The instructors in basic training were tough, he says, but they did their job. You learned night fire, night movement, all of it. He trained on M14 rifles. The M16, the lighter, faster rifle that would become standard issue in Vietnam, wasn't in their hands yet during training. That matters later in the story because the M16, when it first got to Vietnam, had serious problems. A little bit of dust would get in the mechanism and the weapon would stop firing. That's a problem you don't want to discover in the field. After basic, he went to AIT, Advanced Individual Training, specifically Cook School. And then he was sent to Fort Lewis, Washington, before shipping out. His unit was part of the 4th Infantry Division, and that assignment would take him into the Central Highlands of Vietnam. But before any of that, there was a moment back in the States that stuck with him. A sergeant named Fatco, who came very close to derailing his whole trajectory before he ever got to Vietnam. The way it happened was this. The unit was going to be out in the field overnight, but the cooks, this veteran and a couple others, weren't going with them. So they went down to what he calls the Mess Island, and they cooked themselves some steaks. They were sitting there eating when Sergeant Fatco walked in and found them. Fatco was furious, threatened them all with Article 15s, which is a non-judicial punishment in the military, not a court-martial, but not nothing either. Fatco went to the captain and made his case. These guys were back here eating steak while the boys were out in the field. They were called in. The captain asked what they had to say for themselves. And this veteran stood up and said simply, "The boys are in the field. We're in the mess all day, every day. We decided we'd have ourselves a dinner." The captain looked at him and said, when you put it like that." And then he told them something significant. "Sergeant Fatco wants everybody to get an Article 15, but he said, 'We're all going to Vietnam pretty soon. If I give you an Article 15, I can't give you a promotion.'" He was planning to make this veteran a Specialist 5, a Spec 5, a first cook before they shipped out. More money and more respect in the kitchen. He didn't give them the Article 15. He didn't give the promotions either, technically, but he kept the door open. Sergeant Fatco, by all accounts, was furious for months afterward and kept telling this veteran he was going to get him. The veteran's response was simple and direct. "You'll never get me." He said he told Fatco he'd poison his food first. He still laughs about that. Vietnam. Getting there had its own rhythm of disorientation. The plane came down at Cam Ranh Bay, and the first thing that hit them was the heat, the smell, the difference of everything. "First time in a long time with clean sheets," he says, which sounds almost funny until you realize what it means. The sleeping bag he'd been using was so dirty and filthy by that point that he jokes it could have gotten up and walked away on its own. That's what months in the field does to a piece of gear. You sleep in a cot with a mosquito net around you, because if you don't, the mosquitoes take care of you before the enemy gets a chance. His unit set up operations in the Central Highlands, and the captain had a philosophy that shaped everything about how their battery operated. He told every man in the battery that they were going to have 2 jobs. Their primary job was whatever their specialty was, and this veteran's specialty, his first job, was cook. But their secondary job was the gun, because out there, if it came to it, everyone needed to be able to fight. So this veteran learned both. He learned to feed 159 men every day, 3 on and 3 off, starting breakfast prep at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he learned to work the artillery piece. Now the gun they were operating, a 155mm howitzer, is a serious weapon. Phil McCracken, a 6'6" giant of a man in the battery, worked the outside of the gun. The 155 fires projectiles, and there's a specific sequence. The primer goes in, the lanyard goes on, you fire. The range is adjusted by how many powder bags you use. 7 bags of powder is maximum range. You cut the bags if you want a shorter distance. The shell arms itself as it spins out of the grooved barrel. Before it leaves the tube, it won't detonate. Once it's spinning in the air, it arms. They could set those rounds to burst at 30 feet off the ground, burst on contact, a whole range of options depending on the target. And when you've got 6 guns all coordinated to fire at the same spot simultaneously, he says, God knows how many people died from that kind of fire. He says it matter-of-factly, the way someone says it when they've made peace with the arithmetic of war. They were doing their job. That was their job. He describes the cook side of things with genuine pride. Feeding 159 men every day in the middle of a jungle is not a small thing. Breakfast at 3 in the morning, lunch through the middle of the day, then gone until the next rotation. He served SOS, the classic military creamed beef dish, but he made it with chipped beef, cream, did it right, and men came back for seconds. He still tells that story to veterans at their reunions and gets the requisite pushback from guys who claim they never went back for SOS. He knows they did. And Thanksgiving, 10 turkeys for the battery in the middle of the Central Highlands, and then a helicopter appeared on the horizon carrying something unexpected. Ice cream. He told the boys to look up, look what's coming, and a helicopter brought in ice cream for everyone that day. And the infantry units positioned nearby, guys who had been eating sea rations out of a can for 10 days, came over and got a full, hot Thanksgiving meal. He's proud of that. See, in how he talks about it, that feeding those men well, giving them something decent in the middle of all that, was the most concrete act of care he could perform in a place that otherwise didn't offer much. They got hit a few times with mortar fire. He's matter of fact about that, too. When you hear the mortar coming in, there's a particular sound, a whooshing. He tries to reproduce it. And the standing order is you stay where you are. If you're in a vehicle, you stay in the vehicle, because it's almost certainly not going to hit you directly, but shrapnel goes everywhere. One man in the battery didn't listen. He heard the mortar coming and ran for his hooch, and the mortar landed behind him, and shrapnel hit him from the top of his head to his ankles. He was medevaced to Tokyo. They never found out what happened to him after that. That's another thing about war that doesn't get discussed enough. The people who disappeared into the medical system, the guys who got hurt and went away, and you never got a report on whether they made it. They were just gone from your world. On top of each of their guns, mounted up, was a .50 caliber machine gun. He describes the round, about 6 inches long, and what it does. You can't fire it ground-mounted because it'll take off on you. It has to be mounted on a track or a jeep to control it. Perfect gun, he says. Fabulous gun. The kind of honest, practical assessment a man gives when he's spent a year around machinery and learned what works and what doesn't. He had a friend named Emma. They'd been in the same unit, and he ran into him once completely by chance, spotting him walking across with a big pack on his back. "Hey, is that you?" And it was. Emma's job for 10 months in Vietnam was mine-sweeping, walking roads and trails ahead of convoys, finding mines before the trucks rolled over them. 10 months of that, every single day going out in front and sweeping the ground looking for something that would kill you if you found it the wrong way. This veteran says he told Emma flat out, "If you'd stepped on one, you wouldn't be here today." And Emma said, "You know what I mean?" And they went and got drunk for 3 days and probably didn't talk about it much, because that's how men who've been through something together handle it sometimes. Emma still comes to their reunions, over at the Dunkin' Donuts where the veterans from the 4th Division meet up in Indiana. He's still there. Then there's the question of what it all meant. This veteran doesn't dodge that question, and he doesn't soften his answer either. He's direct about it. We shouldn't have been in Vietnam. That's his position, and he holds it without apology. He says there are 58,000 names on the Vietnam Wall in Washington, and those men shouldn't be there, meaning on that wall, meaning dead. He says he looks at that wall and thinks about all the fathers and grandfathers that America could have had, the families that never got built, the lives that never got lived because of that war. He thinks about the greed involved, the men who made money on the war, from the laces on your boots on up. He says the hierarchy in Washington, McNamara, the generals, Westmoreland, lied about the body counts. The NVA would pull their dead back into the jungle so you couldn't get an accurate count. The American command would report kills that didn't represent the real picture. He's seen this from the inside, seen what the information actually looked like versus what got reported up the chain. And he doesn't have any patience for the mythology that built up around the war's progress being reported honestly. He thought Kennedy might have pulled them out. When Kennedy died, he says, that was the end of that possibility. And then the machinery kept going. He's not bitter in a corrosive way. This is a man who's built a good life, who's proud of his kids, who met his wife and stayed married to her for 47 years and counting. But he's clear-eyed about what Vietnam was and what it cost. That clarity is its own kind of tribute to the men on that wall. You don't honor 58,000 dead by pretending the decision to put them in harm's way was beyond criticism. If this story is sitting with you, if you're feeling the weight of what these men went through and what they've carried, this is a good moment to subscribe if you haven't yet. We put these out regularly because there are still veterans who were there, who remember, who want to tell it straight. And every time someone new finds these stories, that's one more person carrying some piece of this history forward. That matters. It genuinely does. Coming home. That's where the haunting part of the title of this story really lives, honestly. Because what happened in Vietnam was terrible, and what happened to a lot of these men when they got back to the United States was also terrible, just in a quieter, less visible way. This veteran came back to Travis Air Force Base, first shower in a long time. 200 guys gathered together, and a captain got up and said he had good news and bad news. The good news, there was a bonus available, $10,000 if you'd go back to Vietnam for another 6 months. He says nobody took it. 200 men, and nobody took it. Not one. And that says something about what the experience had been. He spent 3 days in San Francisco with the other guys before heading home. On the booze, he says, and not apologetically. He'd been in the Central Highlands of Vietnam for a year. 3 days in San Francisco seems like the bare minimum of decompression. There was a song that was playing in that era. He attributes it to Barry Maguire, though the famous version of that particular San Francisco song was actually by Scott McKenzie. But the song was San Francisco, the one about wearing flowers in your hair, and the irony wasn't lost on him. He was going to San Francisco, all right. He was coming back from a war to a city that had become one of the centers of the anti-war movement, and the song about going to San Francisco was about peace and love and flowers, and he was a veteran in a uniform, and those two things didn't fit together easily, because here's what he came home to. He was touted as a baby killer. Those were the words being thrown at veterans in that era. Baby killers. He took his uniform off in the airport. He didn't want to be seen in it. He didn't want the confrontation, didn't want the looks, didn't want whatever was going to come at him if he walked out in his dress uniform. So he changed clothes in the airport bathroom, tucked the uniform away, and came home as a civilian. And that image, a man who served, who went when called, who did his job, who watched men get hurt and carried that with him, who came back and immediately had to hide the evidence of his service to avoid harassment. That image is one of the most painful parts of the Vietnam story, not because it's dramatic, but because it was so common, so quiet. So many men made that same calculation in airports all over the country. He went to work at the gas company, People's Gas in Chicago. That world, the utility world, was a good world for a man with his background. He understood machines, understood procedure, understood how to work in a team and follow a system. Started on cast iron pipe, moved to steel when the technology changed, then to plastic. 6-inch pipe up to 24-inch pipe. Fusion welding, all of it. He drove his own truck. He was a mechanic and welder, did everything. 32 years at that company. Walked out with a pension. He says utilities were good companies to work for in that era, and he's right. That combination of good union wages, pension security, and skilled trades work built a solid middle-class life for a lot of men in those decades, and those things are harder to find now. But early on, when he first started at the gas company, there were a lot of Vietnam veterans coming through the doors. And here's what he noticed, what he's thought about in the years since. Nobody talked about it. Not a word. The veterans at the gas company, the ones who'd been there, they just didn't discuss it. He looks back on that now and finds it almost remarkable. He went to a veterans meeting recently. They meet regularly, Vietnam veterans from the 4th Division. And one of the younger guys there, a welder, said, "You know, we never talked about any of that when we were working together." And this veteran said, "You're right. We were more like ashamed. Ashamed to be exposed to the publicity of it. Ashamed in the public sense, not of what they'd done, but of how it had been received, of the way Vietnam veterans had been branded in the culture. Baby killers, unwelcome, wrong war, wrong outcome, wrong everything according to a country that had turned on the whole enterprise. And so the men who fought it just went quiet. He was drinking in those early years, he'll tell you that directly. He was drinking heavy, and at some point, he was talking to his wife one day, and he was going to work the next morning. He thought to himself, I've got to do something about this. And he came home that night and told his wife he was quitting drinking. He didn't drink for 20 years after that. He says it the same way he says everything else. Matter-of-factly, like it was a decision that needed making, and so he made it. 20 years later, when he retired from the gas company, he had a glass of wine, and then he left it at that. 47 years married. His wife, he says, is a good woman. She was going to come with him to the interview, but decided to let him do it on his own, because some things you have to tell yourself. His son Leonard. This man is proud of Leonard in a way that lights up every time he talks about him. This is the kid he thought might never get out of high school. The kid who wanted to golf and play baseball and not much else, scraping through St. Patrick's with just enough grades to get into Benedictine University, which in turn produced something remarkable. Leonard told his dad he was going to study accountancy and banking. His dad said, "Good man, that's where the money is." Then Leonard switched to IT, computers, because his grandfather had a computer store and had been teaching him about computers from a young age. A professor noted at Leonard's graduation that this kid was solving problems other students were still just thinking about. Today, Leonard is vice president at a subsidiary of IBM. The CEO of IBM sent Leonard a master's ticket last year, as in Augusta National, the golf tournament. And then a few months after that, the CEO called Leonard and asked him to fly to California to brief IBM executives on AI. Leonard gave the presentation to IBM executives, and in the afternoon they played Pebble Beach. And who showed up at the tee at Pebble Beach but Freddie Couples, one of the great golfers of his generation. And Leonard played golf with Freddie Couples that day. The kid his father thought might not get out of high school. The CEO sent a limousine, a 2-hour drive to San Francisco Airport, $400 a night hotel, the whole thing. His father is amazed. He can barely get over it. He told Leonard he'd never get out of high school, and now Leonard is briefing IBM's top executives on artificial intelligence and playing golf with Freddie Couples. His daughter went to Good Counsel High School for Girls and came out as valedictorian. She married an engineer, lives in Missouri now. They moved there from Illinois when the state of Illinois started coming after legal gun owners. Her husband had 50 guns, all legally owned, and rather than fight the state of Illinois about it, they moved across the border to Missouri, where her husband commutes back across to the refinery where he works in Illinois. This veteran and his wife don't drive anymore, so they take the train down to visit, $80 round trip, which he considers quite reasonable. They're going to Ireland together as a family in March, the whole group. He's looking forward to that. He still goes to the veterans meetings, the guys from the 4th Division, some of them from Indiana, some from farther out. Emma shows up with his swept roads and his survival and his story. Phil McCracken, that enormous man who could muscle the 155's projectiles into position. McCracken was a character, a comedian, someone who made the impossible daily reality of combat life somehow bearable through sheer personality. That's what you find in every unit, honestly. Every single unit has those guys, the ones who could make you laugh in the middle of something that was trying to break you. The comedians and the singers, and the guys with the personalities big enough to hold a group of frightened men together. He remembers his replacement coming in toward the end of his tour. You'd go to the replacement center every day and they'd call out units. Anybody here for B62, whatever it was. And if your replacement hadn't arrived, You'd come back the next day and try again. And then the day came when there was a guy there with a pack on his back, clearly fresh, clearly new, clearly looking like this veteran had looked about a year before. He grabbed the replacement and said, "Come here, you're not going over, let's go." Took him back to meet the captain. And the next day he was on a plane. And as they went down the runway to take off, the VC hit the base with mortars. And then the plane was up, and they were out of there, and he was going home. He was in Vietnam from late 1965 through 1967, and he was out of country before the Tet Offensive of 1968. He knows that. He knows that the men who were there for Tet went through something different, something that shook the whole American command structure and the public perception of the war simultaneously. Every American base in Vietnam was attacked during Tet. Every one. He says that like it still amazes him, even from a distance. The coordination that took, the planning, the execution. He was already home by then, already at the gas company, already starting the quiet process of not talking about any of it. When he landed back in America, when his brother-in-law Pat picked him up at the airport, and they were driving away, he looked out the window at the American highway and saw 4 lanes going one way. Just 4 lanes going one way. And he couldn't get over it. In Ireland, you had 1 lane going each way, maybe. Here were 4 lanes, all going the same direction. He said to Pat, "This is amazing. I've never seen 4 lanes going one way." And Pat said, "Yeah, this is America for you." That moment stuck with him. He'd been in Vietnam for a year, in the jungle, cooking for 159 men, working artillery, listening for mortars, watching a friend get medevaced covered in shrapnel, sweating through triple canopy heat and listening to the jungle at night. And then he was on an American highway, and there were 4 lanes going one way, and it was the most impossibly normal, impossibly vast thing he'd ever seen. America for you. Before we get to the very end of this story, I want to say, if you've stayed all the way through, thank you. I mean that. These aren't short, easy stories, and I know that. They're long because the lives behind them are long and complicated and worth the time. If this channel has given you something today, share it with someone who'd appreciate it. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Every person who finds these stories helps make sure they keep getting told. That's the whole thing, honestly. That's why we're here. This veteran got his citizenship. That was part of the deal, and he fulfilled his end of it. He came to America on a green card. He got drafted, he served, he did his time in Vietnam. He came home, he worked 32 years, he raised 2 extraordinary kids, he stayed married to his wife for going on half a century. He stopped drinking when he knew he needed to stop. He went to his veterans meetings, and he kept in touch with the men he served with. He watched the country argue about Vietnam for decades and held his own clear view. They shouldn't have been there. 58,000 men shouldn't be on that wall, and the people who made those decisions lied about the results to cover themselves. He says it without drama, as a simple statement of what he believes is true based on what he saw. There's a generation of men who came back from Vietnam and just got to work. They didn't parade, they didn't demand recognition. A lot of them didn't even talk about it. They took their uniforms off in airport bathrooms and drove home and showed up for the next shift and kept moving. Some of them struggled with drinking. Some struggled with things that didn't have names yet in the 1960s and 70s, things we'd call PTSD today. Some of them found their way to the VA eventually, or to each other, or to their faith, or just to the basic discipline of waking up every morning and doing the thing in front of them. This veteran found his way. He built something real from the life that was given back to him when he came off that plane. A family, a career, a story worth telling. The haunting experiences of Vietnam veterans aren't always the dramatic ones, though there are plenty of those. Sometimes the haunting is quieter. It's the not talking about it for years while you worked beside men who also weren't talking about it. It's the uniform in the airport bathroom. It's the drinking that needed stopping. It's the faces you still see when you think about the men who didn't come home, or the ones who came home so different from who they'd been that they were essentially strangers to themselves for a while. It's the 58,000 names on a wall that this man looks at and thinks about the fathers and grandfathers and the families that America lost along with those lives. But it's also the Thanksgiving ice cream helicopter appearing over the jungle, the pride in a son who solved problems other students were still thinking about, the 47-year marriage, the pension, the Dunkin' Donuts meetings where Emma shows up, still here, 10 months of minesweeping behind him, and still here. The 4 lanes going one way on an American highway that made a man who'd been in the jungle for a year feel like he was seeing the world for the first time. Vietnam was an experience in itself, he says, and he means that in every direction. It was terror, and it was tedium, and it was camaraderie, and it was waste, and it was duty, and it was something he can never fully put down, never fully set aside, because it made him who he is. It made all of them who they are. And the least we can do, the very least, is say so.